let's look at how we can create a new playbook. Creating a playbook requires 3 simple steps. The first one, writing the playbook itself. The second, testing the playbook. And the third, running the playbook in production to see the actual results of the playbook. Let's navigate on the left-hand side to the playbook screen and press Add New Playbook. This playbook currently is not saved, so let's start by saving this playbook, which is in general a good practice. Let's give it a name. Practicing a new playbook. Playbooks have several categories. It can be an investigative playbook, a respond playbook, hunt, correlate, etc. These definitions, these categories are simply to make it easier on the analyst to then choose what playbook he wants to run. It does not affect the actual content of the playbook. So let's choose investigate. And where do we want to save this specific playbook? In this case, I'm saving it under demo. Select and save. Great. Now, a playbook can have several parameters as an input, but also a playbook can be triggered by several different ways. It can be a scheduled playbook, it can be run by yet another playbook, or from an incident of the SIM. For simplicity, let's have this as an internal playbook, so a playbook that would run this playbook. Let's assume we have another parent playbook that gets a list of suspicious IP addresses, and now it actually wants to check within VirusTotal each and every one of those IP addresses, how malicious they are or how suspicious they are. So as an input, this playbook, this sub playbook actually, will be receiving an IP address. So this is a IP address input. Okay, it's just the name of the parameter. You can provide a default value. And let's save this data. If you don't save, it is not saved. The next step, let's actually call VirusTotal with this specific IP address. So there are different actions I can do. I can run another playbook. I can add a comment, an annotation for the analyst that is looking at this playbook, kind of like a comment within a R&D code. I can run a script, but in this case, I actually want to activate an API calling VirusTotal. So my product type is threat intelligence, and I'm looking for VirusTotal vendor, VirusTotal product version 3, and as an action, let's submit an IP address. A parameter, this would be the input parameter that we've just handed into this playbook. So my trigger received an IP address input, and this would be the parameter that I'm now sending to VirusTotal save data. So in theory, this is all that I want to do, but for us to actually see a result, we need now to format the result itself. So let's add an action block called format. Within the format, let's add a text. I've received the IP, and the IP is $parameter var1 curly brackets. I've received the IP, and there are $parameter var2 engines that found it to be malicious. Parameters. So I've used here variable 1 as the input IP address. So let's now define it. var1 is my input IP address. What is the input IP address? I can either take it from my trigger as IP address input, or from VirusTotal as the input parameter to VirusTotal. So these would basically be the same. IP address input, save. And let's add another parameter, variable 2, which would be the result we've received from the virus total action. So API, it resulted, I can get the raw response, or this is what I actually want to know. How many malicious engines found it to be malicious? Save data. So we formatted this message, format VT result. Okay, now let's output this result. So there's an action called case item. You're basically adding to the case, which is defaulted, that comes from the parent playbook that called this sub playbook. So you do not need to add another case ID. Now, if no playbook had actually called this playbook, there will be a case ID generated automatically. And in this case, when we will run it, this is what we will actually see, a new case ID created. What do we want to output? It can be a query result, or in this case, we actually want to label. And what label? The one that we've just formatted as VT result. So label parameter, format VT result. We've created there a message, save, description. This is a message sent to a new case. I'll show you in a second when this output is then written. And make sure to also close this playbook. Save playbook. And with this, we've just completed step 1. Step 2, let's test the playbook itself. IP address, let's give it some kind of IP address, 1111. Playbook. And the playbook was successfully submitted. And here you can actually see the progress. Let's refresh it. And you can see that it's all green, so all succeeded. Now, if, for example, we would not have closed this playbook, then when we run it, it will actually give us an error. Playbook. That this part was skipped. Back to Canvas. Let's close it again. Up, forgot to save. Save playbook. Now, this was the second step. The third step, let's run this playbook with real parameters. So I'm going out of the designing of a playbook into the playbook list. I've saved it under demo. Practicing a new playbook. And now if I actually run it with a parameter, then my IP would be 1111. Run playbook. We'll see the results of this playbook in just a second. But I also want to run in parallel a playbook with a malicious IP, which I prepared in advance. So the second one that I'm running is with malicious IP. Run playbook. Okay. And now let's go and see the actual cases that were created. So in the last 1 minute or so, I expect to see 2 new cases that were created. And you can see it here. And again, so I've my input IP was 11111, and you can see that there is one engine that basically said this might be malicious, a very low number. And if we now look at the second case that was created with a partially malicious IP address, then you can see that this IP address 5270223 actually got 6 engines that found it to be malicious. This is the message sent to the new case. So this is the sublabel that is that we got as an output that we wrote into the label itself. And this was a simple way of how you create a new playbook and test it.